I don't off the top of my head.
$11,788.
Yeah, it's on the next page, thank you.
95 cents.
Thank you, Mel. So those are graphs that are on our website that I've created. I've culled them from the full state total. There's some other information in your packet that breaks down per pupil costs on a statewide basis, not our benchmark basis. And again, I'll repeat Mel's mentioning of the statewide average being 11,788 versus North Reading's 9,049. You can look at this information and you'll see the per pupil spending in a variety of categories. It would come at no surprise to you that in almost every category we are below the per pupil state average, regardless of the purpose. There is one item here that needs to be checked, and that's at the very bottom, payment to out-of-district schools. I think there is a data error there. If you look at those numbers, I don't publish these numbers, these come out of the Department of Education, so I'm trying to analyze that one. But it's the total cost. I think when you're viewing per pupil costs, it's helpful to look at detail, but I think it's also useful to look at the grand totals. Because there are times when you can be a few dollars under in one category and a few dollars over in another category. That's why the holistic look is sometimes useful. There's also information in your packet showing a 3-year trend, expenditures by category once again, and it's difficult to read these aloud, particularly to the viewers at home. Suffice to say that the per pupil expenditure for North Reading, I will provide the summary. In FY05, North Reading's per pupil spending was $8,404. In FY06, it was $8,429, and in FY07, as noted, $9,049. And then the other information in your packet breaks the per pupil spending and aggregate spending down into much greater detail. Everything from legal costs to textbooks to athletic costs to medical costs, etc. And I encourage anyone to look at the website for greater detail. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a brief look at per pupil spending that's just been published.
I just wanted to add to that, and you know, I'm not pulling these specific towns out, and I'm not focusing on our number, the state number, to say we need to get to the state average next year or even in the next few years, because that would be an impossibility given the costs that are required. But at least half of our increase this year, or close to it, is the result of that retiree health care benefit number coming under the school committee budget now versus it being under the town before. So not much of the increase really went to educating our kids. The other thing I'd want to point out is we actually have improved. We were 8th from the bottom last year, and we're now 13th from the bottom. And that's out of 244 districts, not including the regional schools. The regional schools all spend a lot more than we do anyway, just because of their busing issues and et cetera. But I'll just read off the 12 towns that we're above. Berkeley, they have 1,000 students. Douglas has 1,760. Dracut, 4,200. East Bridgewater, 2,500 students. Georgetown, 1,700 students. Grafton, 2,800. Granby, 1,145. Lakeville, 768. Mansfield, 4,900. Pembroke, 3,350 students. Savoy, 62 students. So you can pretty much, they're probably part of some regional district at the higher levels. And then Rentham, 1,200 students. So that's it. Those are the 12 communities that spend less money than we do. And there aren't a whole lot that are grouped around our $9,049 number. And the reason why I want to stress this point is we continue to hear how wasteful our schools are and how can we save money. The answer is we can't. When you're spending this low, this little, when you're this low on the totem pole, you can't look at saving money. We're efficient. We're an extremely efficient school district. And I think it's important to point that out. I know we can't go from 9,049 to 11,800, which is the state average. And that state average is put out of whack because you have some communities that spend 20, 21, 22,000 per student. Places like Cambridge, I think Cambridge spends almost $22,000. But at the same time, in order for us to compete and provide the same education or better education than most of these other districts, we need more funds. And we are efficient. And I think that the per pupil cost every year points that out, that we're an extremely efficient school district. I don't know if any other committee members want to comment on that per pupil.
Well,
Steve?
I think the fair comparison is our peer group, and that's why it's chosen. And we're 15% below the average of the peer group. That reflects itself right across the board. Our class sizes are higher than they should be. We aren't providing the programs we should be. We've got to make up this difference for our children.
So let's move into the next session of our workshop, which is to review the anticipated revenues for FY '09. Dr. Short?
Right, you have a handout that was distributed last week, last Wednesday at the Finance Planning Team meeting. The Finance Planning Team includes the chair and vice chair of the school committee, the board of selectmen, the finance committee, myself, Carl Nelson, town administrator, and town finance director Joe Tassoni. And last week we had a somewhat of a revelation with the update on the anticipated revenue. And I think as we were conducting our budget forums last week, we were somewhat under the impression that with the anticipation of new Chapter 7 money out of the governor's budget, and that's anticipation, that's with the big assumption that it would be forthcoming, but we were targeting the gap between the status quo budget and the available funds at around $265,000. The town administrator presented an update to the revenue, which is recapped on the top sheet, and it shows an overall gap between expected revenue, and the expected revenue comes from state aid and also comes from appropriation, that would show a shortfall of about $1.13 million. The town administrator reduced the town's budget request to close that gap by about $184,000, and so brought the gap between available revenue and what a status quo budget is for both, or level services for both the school and the town, to just under $1 million, around $950,000. So the decision was, well, even before I get into the decision, we talked a lot about some unknown factors. Even with that $950,000 gap, there are some unknowns. One of the unknowns comes from what will be the cost of next year on the school retirement. And the committee knows that under the contract, teacher contract, that there's a February 1st notification date. And so a number of people who had indicated last year that they were going to retire have pushed that off by a year. So we, Mr. Nelson notified the town today that we expect that down by about $125,000. So that will go into some level of reducing that that gap. Another area is the health insurance. Not what the town is doing. The town administrator is working with various town employee groups to take a look at either joining GIC, the general state insurance plan, or to work with a current provider to see if there is a, a better way, a better plan that could be provided. So that really is a town responsibility. The town administrator is working on that. When we talk about unknown factors, we're talking about what will be the percent health increase for next year. And that's been running anywhere from 12 to as high as 18% a year. In these revenue projections, I believe there's a 15% increase projected for next year in the health insurance. And every percent change on the employee health benefits represents about a $47,000 difference. So let's say instead of 15%, which is being projected in the expense side, it comes in at 12%. Then it would be about 141,000 less that would drop that gap. But again, that's an unknown, and the town administrator told our finance planning team that, maybe in a month or within a month or two, we should have some sense, a better sense, as to what that number is. Some other areas would be in terms of any new revenue above and beyond what's anticipated from state aid. If there's a change in any of those figures, if it goes up or down. So for example, and that's why I've included the governor's budget anticipated increase in Chapter 70 aid at a decrease in the lottery. But if those numbers change either way, that's going to go into the equation of changing the anticipated revenue. Lastly, any additional revenues that might be obtained from the construction project, housing apartments at the J.T. Berry Center, whether those are new revenues that have not been anticipated at this point. So when you put all those unknown factors out on the table, I think it makes everyone nervous because they're not sure which way to go. So the feeling was that we should target the $950,000 as a potential gap between available revenue and the so-called level services budget. I believe the level services budget for the town is about a 3%. And so for the school department, the feeling is that we should look at an available funds budget that is about up to $400,000 below what our status quo budget is. Right. So if we would, and we'll talk about that later tonight, about some recommendations on what would be reduced from existing services in order to close that gap to achieve the balance. I think it was clearly made to the finance planning team that this is not a school committee recommended budget, but we'll talk about that as the recommended budget. But we need to let the community know what are some areas that we would target if we are living under a level, not a level, but a available, so-called available funds budget.
And as Deanna Castro mentioned earlier, we had 3 budget forums last week, and we actually probably had at least 60 parents attend. They're very good, very informative. We got the people involved. And as I pointed out at those meetings, we're required by law to have a level funds budget at the town meeting in case any kind of override or other budget does not pass. So that's why tonight we have to go through what will be cut in that $400,000, if that's what the number is, to meet the level funds budget. So that's $400,000 from what we're proposing for next year for our status quo budget, which would be the same program we have now moving to next year. So we have to do that tonight. We also have to look at what we want to recommend as a budget, but we have to have that level funds budget because we have to vote on something next meeting, I believe. Is that correct, Carl? Next meeting?
2 weeks from tonight. Yes.
Correct.
All right.
Deanna?
Just a quick question, has the chapter 70